Hello. I'm the first negative rebuttal. Yes, negative? Yes. Yes, that's right. Yes. In review, the Patriot Act is a bill that was passed shortly after 9/11 that was specifically written to aid law enforcement with dealing with terrorist threats. It is worded with the utmost care to prevent an abuse. On top of all of that, the Patriot Act is constitutional and has been proven so through many Supreme Court cases. For this debate, only sections 206, 213, and 412 of the Patriot Act will be discussed, as the Patriot Act contains too many laws to be discussed in full within our time constraints. Section 206 gives the government the right to enact roving wiretaps in certain situations. Section 213 summarizes to the target of a search warrant does not need to be notified that the search warrant is going to be enacted. This is also referred to as covert entry. Lastly, Section 412 requires the detention of aliens who are considered a threat to our nation until they are deported from the United States. The affirmative side is arguing to repeal Sections 206, 213, and 412, and therefore leave our nation almost defenseless against terrorist attacks. The negative side is arguing to keep Sections 206, 213, 412 in place, as they make our nation a much safer place. Throughout the years, America has faced countless threats from foreign nations, from the British Empire in the Revolutionary War to the Japanese during the World War II. These threats historically have been nations, with large military forces filled with trained soldiers, but the nature of war has changed, and it has moved much closer to home. We are no longer fighting organized forces. The people we are currently fighting are not soldiers. They use gross acts of terror in an attempt to undermine the United States. These terrorists have been operating within the borders of the United States, which, last time I checked, is not a war zone. We do not have tanks patrolling our streets. We do not have to sweep our roads for improvised explosive devices. What protects our nation is our law enforcement. The CIA, FBI, and local police forces cannot effectively fight terrorism within the United States without help from the Patriot Act. First, I would like to talk about something that my opponent Alyssa said. She claimed that yelling "there is a bomb" in a crowded airport falls under the First Amendment. This is actually false. Even though we like to think our speech is truly free, there are actually restrictions to free speech within the United States. According to PBS.org, in this U.S. Supreme Court case, Scheck v. U.S. in 1919, words can create a clear and present danger. This means that any speech that could cause harm or damage to property is illegal. The example that has been used countless times is shouting fire in a crowded movie theater. This would obviously cause panic and people could possibly get hurt. This is something that the Patriot Act has never tried to restrict to a greater degree. When talking about Section 206 of the USA Patriot Act, it is extremely important to note that this is not a new law. It was originally introduced in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, according to the Department of Justice. Removing this law from the Patriot Act would not remove the law, but instead not allow for the uniform statutory standard that we currently have in regard with this law and Section 213, as mentioned by my colleague Hannah. Another very important part of this law is that it can only be used in extremely specific cases, according to a Department of Justice article titled "The USA Patriot Act, Myth or Reality." This allows our government to monitor people who are trained in counter-surveillance. Our opponents repetitively mentioned that it would lead to abuse, but this is just not true. All of the acts that we are debating today require more stringent supervision from the courts. According to the actual wording of the USA Patriot Act, roving wiretaps may be enacted in, quote, circumstances where the court finds the action of the target of the application, which means the target being wiretapped, may have the effect of thwarting the identification or surveillance. This boiled down means that the court first has to prove that it is not sufficient enough to have just one wiretap. This does not abuse the Fourth Amendment because the warrant for a single wiretap must still be acquired, and it cannot be abused because the court permission must first be acquired to allow for multiple wiretaps. This law only applies to a single person, and more warrants will be needed to wiretap other members of a group. In my next rebuttal, I will talk about the constitutionality of the two other sections of the Patriot Act.
As Sam talked about yesterday, roving wiretaps is not a new concept. A roving wiretap is the same as a normal wiretap, but it allows the eavesdropper to tap any new phone line, internet connection, or physical location that the suspect is using. It is used in situations where the suspect continually switches phones or safe houses to evade the person trying to tap them. The concern with Section 206 is not with the authority itself. Rather, the issue is the lack of adequate checks and balances, said James Dempsey in an article titled "Why Section 206 Should Be Modified." The constitutionality of roving wiretaps under the USA Patriot Act is questionable at best. The Fourth Amendment states that all warrants must particularly describe the place to be searched. If the wiretap is roving, the governing body does not have to get a second warrant to bug a new location that the suspect is thought to be associated with. This could easily lead to the eavesdropping and intercepting of countless civilian conversations. Roving wiretaps have been allowed in criminal cases under the U.S. Code, Title 18, Chapter 119, Wire and Electronic Communications Interceptions and Interception of Oral Communications. The Patriot Act, Section 206, leaves out two major clauses that keep the power of the Act in check. The first one is the ascertainment requirement. In criminal cases, agents must prove or ascertain that the suspect is in the location with the bug before they start recording. An example of that would be a hotel room. In criminal roving wiretaps, the FBI can set up a bug in a hotel room beforehand, but cannot start recording until the suspect is checked in. Or if the FBI is monitoring a computer at the local library, they can only monitor it when they've confirmed that the suspect is using that computer. This is not the case with the Patriot Act, however. The second major difference with the Patriot Act is that it authorizes John Doe roving surveillance. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's where the FBI has the authorization to tap your phone, or when the FBI has the authorization to tap your phone, they can use that authorization to monitor any new phone, location, or internet connection that the suspect uses without actually knowing the identity of the suspect. Because of the loose wording of the USA Patriot Act, the FBI has been monitoring thousands of innocent civilian conversations, which is a violation of their privacy.
My opponents mention that the Patriot Act is not specific enough, and this could lead to abuse. This is actually a result of their jejune attempts at the wording of the Patriot Act. The wording is very similar to the language that defines when police are allowed to use warrants to search someone's personal effects. Probable cause. Two simple words that define the whole basis of our legal system. According to law.com, probable cause is defined as sufficient reason based upon known facts to believe a crime has been committed or that certain property is connected with a crime. Behind probable cause rests extreme power, yet it is tamed by simple language. Just because the Patriot Act itself is not very wordy does not mean that each of the sections are poorly written to allow for abuse. I'd like to talk about something Cooper just said regarding with the John Doe wiretaps. Just because the authorities do not know the name of the subject who is being searched or wiretapped, they must provide adequate information to know who this subject is, like nationality, locations, and all of this sort of stuff. So it's not that they can just go out and randomly wiretap random people. Going back to the constitutionality of the USA Patriot Act, In Section 213, the exact wording that deals with the most important part of the section is, a warrant may be executed if, quote, the court finds reasonable cause to believe that providing immediate notification of the execution of the warrant may have an adverse result. As my group mentioned, this only applies to specific cases where, according to the Department of Justice article titled USA Patriot Act, Myth versus or Reality, if the suspect was notified of the warrant, it could result in intimidation of witnesses, destruction of evidence, flight from prosecution, physical injury, and even death. Another clarification is that courts still must approve of a search warrant, and then have to apply for permission to delay said notice. Because the warrant still has to be acquired, it does not go against the Fourth Amendment. I will admit, when I first read about Section 412 of the USA Patriot Act, I was shocked and horrified. How could we, in our fair and just society, allow someone to be detained indefinitely without trial? But when I actually started to conduct research, I realized that it only applied to very specific circumstances. Let me explain. If there is a non-citizen that has committed actions against the United States, this person can be held until they are removed from the USA. Why would we release dangerous criminals back into our society where they would be free to commit crimes and possible terrorist attacks before they are tried? This is exactly the same as not allowing a bail to be set for dangerous criminals who are citizens, which forces them to be detained without actually being proven guilty of anything. At any point, these people who have been detained under Section 412 of the USA Patriot Act can ask to be tried, which acts as a check to prevent innocent people from being deported. I would like to end my speech with something to think about. Imagine this. You are a perfect driver. You drive the speed limit all the time. You don't commit any major traffic violations. There is no reason for the police to ever go out and try and search for you. What if they measure your speed with a radar? You would still be doing the right thing, and the police would still have no reason to pursue you because you were obeying the law. But if you were a reckless driver, always speeding, cutting people off, eventually someone would complain to the police. Then, one day, your speed would be measured by a cop. Maybe you were going, say, 95 in a school zone. The police would have to have the complete and unarguable right to pull you over because you are a threat to society and are not abiding by the laws that have been set. If you are a law-abiding citizen, you spend your life the way you want to. As long as you're not trying to build bombs or hijack planes, there is nothing you have to fear from the Patriot Act. The police could not and would not even try to get a search warrant to wiretap or search your personal effects. The only people this act really affects is the people actively trying to destroy our nation from the inside. Nobody can argue terrorism within the U.S. is a good thing. Why make it harder for law enforcement to defend against it?